talking about literature in the age of climate crisis. So this panel on climate crisis and literature has some eminent people who have been working in this area all their life. Before I introduce them, let me begin by quoting what Ursula K. Le Guin says. She says, "We need stories that are not about saving the world, but about living rightly within it." I think that takes us right into the concerns that this panel wishes to address. I remember when I was in the high school, that was the first time that I was introduced to this idea of climate crisis, when Sundarlal Bogana visited our school, in a remote place in Sirsi, and that was what? Keshav, please. That was nearly 45-50 years ago, which means that climate crisis, although we have been talking about it a little more in the recent past, has been around for a very long time. And is it something that has, why is this climate crisis always in the crisis mode? Some of the questions that we want to address today are how literature can help in creating a better awareness about issues related to climate, how to address them, how literature can address them, how literature, art, and here we don't necessarily mean only imaginative writing, or the entire field of cultural texts, how they can address, and what kind of language do we need to address climate crisis. These are some of the concerns that I would like to begin by pointing out, and we have a very eminent panel here. Sumana Roy is the author of the much loved How I Became Tree, a non-fiction book, and more recently, very important plant, VIP, a collection of poems, and also her collection of literary criticism, the plant thinkers of 20th century Bengal, among many other books that she has published, including Provincial, a favorite of mine. She has been writing beautifully about Anthropocene and other ways to engage with issues related to plants, issues related to ecology. We have Jenny Pittu, a filmmaker, a writer, and designer. She is the founder of Urja and also the design director of the Purple Turtles. She has authored the book The Magical Everything, and in all endeavors she keeps her environmental concerns at the heart of all her endeavors. So Jenny Pittu is with us. Then we have Dr. Keshav Korse, professor, researcher, and conservation biologist. He is the director of the Center for Conservation Biology and Sustainable Development in Sirsi. His work involves research, training, public awareness, and writing on topics related to the biodiversity, ecology, medicinal plants, and farming issues of the Western Ghats and coastal regions. We have the right panel to talk about this topic. So I'll begin with Sumana. Sumana, as a writer, how do you address your concerns related to climate? How writing has given you the channel, the means of articulating, as well as perhaps facilitating a certain kind of, let us say, public debate or conversations about issues related to climate crisis.
Thank you, Kamalakar, for asking me to be here and for this question. It's something that my students and I struggle with often. the fact that whenever we think of climate and weather and nature, we always imagine this to be a very public conversation. We forget that there is a kinship that we feel with the world around us, and that world does not necessarily include only humans. Just think of the structure of this room. My friend Vinuta is here, and it is possible that 2 years from now, if I were to ask Vinuta, do you remember what I wore that day? And she'll probably remember the color of my sari. But if I were to ask her, do you remember the flowers or the plants that were there? It is likely that she would forget. There's a kind of generic, what Matthew Hall has characterized as plant blindness. We notice, we are aware of these things, and yet we do not notice them. As I was telling you and Vinuta, when I was in Pune last week, as I was moving from the airport to the city, I was struck by an absence. The trees had been cut over there. As soon as I entered the city, I'm not familiar with the city. This might only be my second or third visit. But I was aware of this absence, a ghost of something that was there, but is no longer there because it has been taken away. Like the way we are, I suppose, when we go to a room or a house and we notice an absence left by a photograph that was hanging on a wall. We know that because of the discoloration around it, we know that something was there. We have to struggle to remember what was there. But we are moved by, and we are also aware of its absence through its, the absence is very present. As you were introducing me, you used the word Anthropocene and also climate change, and you asked about my writing, Kamalakar. It has been my ambition to never use these words while writing about plant life or the environment. We live in a world where the forest department nails saved trees onto the bodies of trees, and we know that nothing happens to us. So similarly with a subject like climate change, we are not really moved into action. We need to develop a more intimate vocabulary that, I'm sure this is important to scientists, but for someone like me who's an unremarkable person trying to make sense of the world around me, these categories do not help me very much. Our session is called Literature in the Age of... Our session is called Literature in the Age of Climate Change. And I've been trying to think whether there was ever a time when there hasn't been climate change. 100 years ago, Rabindranath Tagore, and I say this not because I'm Bengali, in The Religion of the Forest, he's writing about Meghdootam. So 100 years ago, when Tagore in The Religion of the Forest is writing about Kalidasa's Meghdootam, and I think many of us who are familiar with Meghdootam and Ritu Samhara, we realize that Kalidasa is not really interested in people. He's almost like a drone moving over this, what is the Indian subcontinent, the lovely, beautiful, wondrous, Adbhut Indian subcontinent, and recording its foliage, its beautiful rivers, the elemental life. And Tagore says something that I've never been able to forget. He says, we make the mistake of thinking that Kalidasa was witness to that foliage. He saw those plants like it was. He experienced them. Rabindranath Tagore says, no, he's at a remove from them. He is thinking of them, he has to imagine them. Just as I, writing in the, he's writing in the early 20th century, have to imagine what my Bengal was. What someone who followed him, like Jivanananda Das, a poet that many of you might be familiar with, he has to imagine his Ruposhi Bangla, his beautiful Bengal, as much as he is cataloguing and recording it. So I think literature always has been, a record of the weather and the climate, both internal and external. The phrase climate change, the word Anthropocene, they do not really move us because they have become bureaucratic terms. I think you or whoever designed this session wanted to put the emphasis on literature and after that climate change. That it is only natural that literature will record the change of everything around us, whether it is your internal weather or the change in climate outside. And I think that internal vocabulary the modernist Anna Rasa theorists gave us, for climate change too, we need to find a new intimate vocabulary of kinship.
Yeah, intimate vocabulary of kinship that can move us into action, as Sumana tells us, and also something that deepens our perception of our kinship with our environment. Jenny, you have been very passionate about making a difference. In our chat, you told me how you have been very, very concerned about creating a certain kind of awareness amongst everyone, making people sensitizing people about concerns of environment, especially children, and in our educational channels as well. Tell me how literature, education, or any kind of writing and cultural text, how can they advance these concerns, and how do you perceive it?
Firstly, thank you to the Academy for inviting me to a very important talk today, and thank you, Mr. Kamalakar, for including me in this. It's a big question, and all these conversations are actually a lifetime of conversations. But just to take it back a few steps, when you say I was a filmmaker, I was actually I was an advertising filmmaker in the 80s, and I also became a mother in the 80s, and there was also environmentalism sort of started becoming something in the 80s. And all these three things came together, and I was wondering, what am I doing in marketing and advertising when the environment is now beginning to be a concern? It started with the ozone layer. Actually, everybody in the 80s was talking about the ozone hole in the ozone layer. So I sort of left advertising in order to explore can I look at the flip side of production? Because I realized at that stage that consumption is actually a big driver of environmental degradation, our increasing consumption. Another thing that happened in the late 80s, early 90s was liberalization. Suddenly India became a country where our consumption increased and stuff. So that really my journey began then. And I looked at, like I said, the flip side of consumption, which was production. And I started firstly making paper from waste. Until today, I have a brand that we make lighting from. All our materials are waste, and through that entire journey of making things from waste, I began to look at patterns of consumption. How do especially urban consumption, how do societies function? And it's really, what I think was clear to me over the last 25 years is that you cannot separate, and life is really one interconnected whole. So if you talk about literature really reflects life. And so far, I think we have, climate change is probably the largest crisis humanity faces, and so it's quite natural that society goes through a whole period of denial. And I think for many years, the climate deniers I think the world has been dominated by climate deniers. Now it's slowly changing. So that denial then leads to a certain acceptance, and then it leads to fear. And I think there has been not enough, I think, to a large extent, because of these stages that society has gone through, I don't think literature has responded the way it should. I think there should have been, it's been more the poetics of disaster, if you ask me. Even if films have responded with films like The Day After Tomorrow or Don't Look Up or whatever films there have been, Mad Max. Mad Max was in a way looking at a dystopian future. And like I said, I think it just reflects reflects people and reflects life. We have left the climate narrative largely to science and economics, and science has been pretty scary. We have left it to science. We've left, so we've talked about. We started talking about in the first COP. We started talking about we set a goal for 2030 of 1.5 degrees, and we are well on our way to crossing 1.5 degrees temperature rise, despite all the science, despite economists talking about degrowth, and you have all sorts of discussions, but we have not. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. I mean, since the 70s when environmental started, they say with Rachel Carson's book, The Silent Spring, in the 60s, we have destroyed about 75% of our forests worldwide. We have destroyed millions of species in the biodiversity. Like I said, we are well on our way to crossing 1.5 degrees. So it has not made a difference. So the science of it has not made a difference. And I think if you look at literature historically also, the narratives came from the great epics. It came, societies, and climate change is as much a behavioral and a societal problem as it is scientific. Until we change our behavior, and that behavior I think comes from stories. There are not enough stories talking about the people who sit in conference rooms and make policies. Don't know the stories of the people who are really impacted by climate change. They don't think about the way we are educated. Our education has not caught up with changing the narrative on this at all. Because now, you said, I teach children, because I realized that I think we need to go back, and I teach middle school children, and I can tell you that the 10 and 12-year-olds have got other people who are the humans who have it down the best. By the time we're 18, our education has ruined us. So the kids of 10 and 12, they just get it. In fact, a few days ago, we were talking about biodiversity and the role of biodiversity, how each creature has a role, the interconnections in biodiversity and the environment. And one 10-year-old says, "Ma'am, I have a question." And she says, in all this, what is our role on the planet? I mean, a 10-year-old asked me, she said, what is our role on this planet? And I couldn't answer her. What is our role? I mean, I didn't want to tell her that our role so far has been just destructive. But this was a question coming from a 10-year-old, because they really get it. When you talk about it, I also teach circular design and stuff in colleges now. And I feel by the time we reach post-school and we are in professional colleges, we're not really interested, We're not interested in the environment. So what has happened from the time we're 10 to 18? What has happened? It's basically education and how the rest of society is evolving, in terms of social media to a large extent also, but the other, So I think literature, I really feel that we need much more writing on the positive aspects of the environment. Our connections with nature, because we come up with crazy slogans like save the planet. We cannot save the planet will save us. We cannot save trees, the trees will save us. And we've got to get those basics. We have to internalize those basics, and I think we only do that through school education. School education, which was probably designed for a post-industrial world, post-industrial revolution world, has to change to have a lot more crossovers between science and all the sciences, science and geography, those interconnections are what is missing. I mean, our education tends to be reductive, and we tend to have. So I think those interconnections are very important, especially in today's world, where it is our connections with nature that is really important.
Yeah.
To get back those connections.
Right. So, Jenny has pointed out how literature hasn't adequately addressed concerns with climate, and how science has always been the field where climate concerns have been primarily articulated. Now we have a scientist who has been working in the field. Let us get Keshav into the conversation. Keshav, tell us, from a scientist, a conservationist point of view, you have working in this field, you have 7 years of experience in diverse activities. Tell us, take us through your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. I think all of us agree that we can take climate change as an umbrella term for all the crises you are undergoing right now. In fact, it is climate emergency now. Even the UN has declared its climate is boiling actually. So it's a very serious topic and serious time to think about. So thank you for having this aspect in this larger literary fest. Actually, as I said, climate change is not, can be comprehended, can be understood not only by scientists, I mean the lab-based scientists, it involves all sorts of experts, economists, anthropologists, sociologists, policymakers and so on. So if we imagine this broad scale and spectrum of climate science discipline, whether the literature responding to the present challenges posed by climate change, that is a question I would like to answer. So literature, for the convenience of this particular discussion today, I would like to make in 3 or 4 categories. One is academic research output across the country, across the world of course. People are doing hard science to understand what is climate change. That's one kind of course, not only scientists, economists, sociologists, and academic literature. That's number 1. Number 2, the real creative people who are coming up with, Amitabh Ghosh kind of people, are coming up with, novels, the poetry. And the third one is popular science kind of literature. Maybe in such journals, magazines, newspapers, edit page articles, open-end articles, that kind of stuff. And fourth one, typical media news stories. So broadly, all these different categories of literature are influencing the present-day imagination and understanding of climate change. But the difference in the West and in India is, for West, climate change crisis is almost 100 years or 200 years old. It's a, more or less, it's a post-industrial revolution kind of thing. But here in India, if you go into the literature, at least I am comfortable only with Kannada as well. Thousands of years in the medieval Vachana period, or even earlier to that, even in some Sanskrit literature, and later on in the Dasa Pantha, Dasa Sahitya in Kannada, we find all anecdotes of crisis the people face at them, because environment or the Nisarga per se was not something distant reality or distant thing for the people here in the countries like India or Asia or Africa. They were amidst the nature, and all the day-to-day life was actually being influenced by those positive or negative, whatever, they used to interact with the nature. So we have a lot of insights in those literature. So for me, climate change is a new reality, not the new dimension, not exactly new reality. To make it simple, climate change issues were there earlier, but only the scale is bigger now. It's more visible, more being experienced. That is number 1. Number 2, coming to the modern literature, to make the story, cut it short, to make it simpler. In the modern Kannada literature, we have many celebrated authors. Kuvempu, Karanth, they all brought this beauty of this nature, with their unique and great capacity of description, capacity of, so that's why they brought the nature, towards the, nearer the people through their writings. In fact, here I should make a comment. Here in at least Karnataka, if you look at the last 70, 80 years of modern literature, I'm talking about, it is those writers who brought this issue nearer to the people, not the scientists. Still, I feel that scientists have yet to come out in a bigger sense. Here and there, maybe people are doing, but as a whole, as a community, scientists are far behind than these great authors like Kuvempu, Karanth, and later on Tejasvi. So creative writing I'm talking about. I believe same thing happened in Indian literature, also Indian English literature, also many creative writings, novels have come. And the second aspect is the kind of scientific, popular science literature. I think this is the area where India actually stands out. India has a huge strength. When Arundhati Roy came up with, in late 80s or 90s, her big essay, long essay on criticizing the Narmada story, and later on, the greater common good, and then about nuclear explosion. So these kind of actually essays, trigger the imagination of the country. So last 30, 40 years, India has come out with a huge, high quality literature, both in English and Kannada. Ramchandra Guha, Vandana Shua, and Sunita Narain. So many, authors have come out with huge scientific background to validate their arguments. So that literature is there in Indian English, and in Kannada also, in modern day, Kannada days, in the last 30, 40 years, as Kamalakar was mentioning. Let me tell you here, the first ever major international conference on the impact of major dams, big dams, on the ecology of sensitive ecosystems like Western Ghats took place in Karnataka, in the Western Ghats. So in 80s. So then there are people like Madhav Gadgil and Shivram Karan came together. They actually brought this, otherwise it should have been in the lab, the science, they brought to the open in the ground. And so that's why last 40 years, huge sorts of these popular science writings have been done in Karnataka. And I forgot one thing about folk literature. All these issues are being addressed from the many centuries, even today. Many folk stories, folk songs, and so on. So people cannot make really the Marka and Desi classification here. It was there in the discussion in the literature, in mainstream literature, in the folk literature, and so on. So that's why today we have at least as far as literature is concerned, it is responding to the situation, responding to the demand. Only thing is, here at least in people in our country are not able to, though they know climate change impact, they are not actually comprehending the scale of its impact. So that is where we need to look in, and we need to recognize the emergency of climate change.
Right. So we have literature since centuries which have addressed our intimate relationship with climate as well as our changing relationship with climate, and yet, as all the three panelists have pointed out, that we need to deepen our perception, we need to perhaps intensify our responses to the climate crisis. Now, all the three have also written in their own way about climate crisis. So I'll ask them about how, in their own writing, they have tried to, what kind of, I think we should also look at, what kind of writing can adequately, successfully, and sensitively, deal with this. What kind of language do we need? We'll come to the questions in a little while, just a few minutes. One more round of questions and we'll come to questions. What kind of language do we need? How do we speak about climate? Can we speak about climate the same way we speak about human beings, or do we need a different kind of a language to bring in the non-human world into literature? I would like to ask the panelists this question: how your writing, in your writing, you have tried to address making climate a part of your work. What are the questions and difficulties that you faced in that?
Keshav mentioned folklore, folk literature. Let me use that as a kind of starting point. I went to the Bhimbetka caves, I think about 2 years ago. And one of the things that struck me was this lack of focus on the human. There is an equal distribution of attention, or an equitable distribution of attention between human figures, animal figures, plants, and so on. I often ask I would love to teach in a school, Jenny. That has been my dream, to teach mathematics, language, and increasingly botany to junior school students, actually. I have a nephew who's 13 years old now, and he, like most of us, are familiar with Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. So I think all of us here know that Mona Lisa in that drawing, in that painting, has no eyebrows, because it was a style of that time for women to not have eyebrows. If I were to ask any of you, do you remember the plants or trees behind Mona Lisa? No, why you? I wouldn't be able to say that. Something striking changed between the time of the Bhimbetka caves and Mona Lisa. Mona Lisa is a product of the Renaissance idea of man. Oh, what a wonder. What is the thing from Hamlet? What a piece of work is man. So when the Renaissance humanist puts man at the center of the world, a different kind of artistic tradition is produced, which is portraiture. We become the center. Everything else becomes, to borrow a word that Kamalakar has been forced to use, everything else becomes the non-human. And yet we know that this is not how the world functions. I'm triggering there. So if you think of the architecture of your house, of the apartment complex, or the house that you might be living in, where are the trees? They are at the margins, the boundary walls. This is only analogical to where they exist in our own imagination and our own public policies. When you ask me, Kamalakar, how do I write about these so-called non-humans? With as much degree of attention, affection, anger, disgust, all the 9 rasas, as I do about you or Keshav or Jenny or Vinuta or anyone. As soon as we decide that we must have a specialized vocabulary to write about them, we are treating them as differently abled creatures, to use a politically correct term from our times. To think, I know I'm repeating myself, but to think of anything and everything as living is an inheritance of thinkers from the Indian subcontinent. I've always been surprised, for instance, whenever I've gone to Europe or had to give a lecture, people say, oh yes, you will feel this way. Or when I speak about Jagadish Chandra Bose, whose work was dismissed as mumbo-jumbo by the American scientific establishment, the response always is, you will obviously speak this way because you come from an animistic culture. If we go back to our oldest books, how does the Rig Veda begin? With the elements. That too is a literature of climate, if not of climate change. That something has existed before and that should be recorded. Just as when Bharat Muni is asked why he is noting down why these rasas when everyone knows them, why Vatsayana is asked why he is writing the Kama Sutra when everyone knows what this is about. He says, I must record it so that people don't forget. I would like to think of people who composed the Rig Vedas, the Upanishads and other literature, which I do not think of as religious or ritualistic, but as literature that is taking joy in the wonder of the world, in the wonder of being alive. And that is the vocabulary that we don't have. Jenny touched upon this when she began speaking. What we have today is a very Hollywood studio version of climate that sells. The apocalyptic movie. The apocalypse, our nervous system, from what I know, cannot always be in that state of fight or flight. We must partake of the pleasure in the world. I have no Kannada at all, but listening to what was happening there, the inauguration, one of the words that came up repeatedly is a word that I understood. It's the word vivek, conscience. We seem to only focus on conscience when we think about the literature of climate change. But as the 19th century tells us, there was another word that came to add itself to vivek, vivek ananda. The ananda that you can find in the conscience also. What has happened to the literature of climate change is that it has been divorced from ananda. If we can resuscitate this wonder of being alive, even in the small things that we find around us, I think something will happen to literature and to ourselves.
Yes, Viveka and Anand. So much Viveka in what you said, Sumana. Thank you so much. Jenny, your take.
Yeah, actually, I'll take off exactly from Vivekananda and Ananda because I decided to write a book for children. Firstly, because I believe that's where change has to start, and secondly, I'm not educated in climate or science or anything, so I said what I know and what I've experienced is enough to talk to children about. So my book is basically about the ananda of going and actually finding out about what makes, it's a story of a little girl who has got a science project to do, and a science project on climate, and she says, I don't want to do climate solution which is just taking a cloth bag to the supermarket or turning off switches. I don't want to do that kind of project of climate action. She wants to find out more. And she actually, which in a way connects, that's why I wanted to read your book. Her best friend is a tree that her grandfather planted in her garden, and she, and actually that experience really came, I was able to put those in words, because I found right through my life, my best ideas came when walking in a forest. And I always put that down as, I'm getting my ideas from these living beings that we tend to only think of as, as whatever, green beauty or the source of oxygen or whatever, but they're not. I think they're far more. And if you, and if you look at it from the point of view of that matter and energy can never be created or destroyed, all of us could have been trees at some point. We could have just. So maybe that's my connection with trees. So this girl has a special connection with this tree in her garden, and because she always found that when she sits in this tree, all her questions get answered. She's able to come up with answers. And this tree then sends her off on an adventure, because she comes and tells this tree, I have to do this project, and I'm actually really like, I'm stuck with what I should do, and so the tree says, okay, fine, calm down, sit down, close your eyes, and the tree sends her off on a journey, which is very much like Alice in Wonderland, into space, where she gets rescued by a spaceship where the astronaut looks like a school driver, and then this guy talks about the evolution of the planet, and he says the good place to start is for looking at the ecosystems, and then he sends her into 3 ecosystems, which is under the ocean, where she makes friends with a whale, and then she goes, and then the 3rd ecosystem is into the soil, where she meets the microbes, like Alice. She reduces in size, and so her adventures then take her, because the idea was to actually not just the joy of what are the things in nature that support our life, but it is also about recognizing how important we wouldn't be alive if it was not for photosynthesis and it wasn't for. And so she goes, so the astronaut tells her she has to find this one thing that is responsible for all life on the planet, and that's magical everything, and that's what my book is called, The Magical Everything. Do any of you know what could be this one thing that keeps all of us alive? What is the root of it? What could be the magical everything? What could be this one thing, the one important element that we experience every moment of the day, that is the magical everything that keeps us alive, keeps all of us alive? The sun. Sunlight, the sun itself. Because our energy comes from that, and then everything, and then travels down the food chain, and at the end of the book she discovers it. So it was a journey actually to find the wonder, and I think what we've lost in the current, sorry to use the word you don't like, anthropocentric world, is actually our joy and our wonder and our connection with nature, which actually keeps us alive. We are not in charge of nature. We are completely part of it, and so that is something I feel education has to bring back to us at a young age, which is why I wrote about this young girl. And the book is for children, whatever, up to from 10 to 18 have enjoyed it, but it was really about discovering our deep connections with nature. That was what and I wrote it in simple language, so that kids can read.
Yeah, right. So Viveka, Ananda plus magic. These are watchwords that we like to keep in mind. Turning to Keshav, so you being a scientist, you have also written about climate concerns. Let's hear your thoughts on how you go about writing about climate.
Yeah, let me make just 2 to 3 quick points. Sumana's Viveka Ananda reminded me an old Upanishad principle. Rut Runa Dharma. That means we should accept nature is something is very big, bigger than us. And we need to revel that, because it's giving all these things, prana, sun, and food, everything. It's nourishing us. And it is cyclic in nature. For long, the Western lifestyle, Western thinking used to think it's a linear pattern. But we knew from the ages that all these natural processes are cyclic. That's Rut. And we have Runa for that, because we have an obligation to do something to protect this, to give back to the nature. That's Runa. And for that Runa, we need to do some dharma, the proper works. Often this principle is discussed in the context of some religious sense. Actually, we should take this Rut Runa Dharma in the context of ecological sense. We should accept this nature as something big, and we have obligation to do sure responsibilities, and we should do something, in terms of our lifestyle, because that ultimately climate change solution lies with the morality of a person. How much energy I consume, how much water I consume, how much all the natural resources I consume. That's number one. We should bring back this to the mainstream thinking of our society, number one. Number two, we need more celebrity scientists in the public space. Swaminathan was there, Anil Agrawal was there, And in Karnataka, we had a great personality called Shivram Karand was there in the 80s and 90s. And Madhav Gadgil is, of course, is still there, but he's still, he's passing through his old age. So the core academicians, not only scientists, means the economy, sociologists, anthropologists. The core academicians, if they come up with a larger public place, with that academic background, then people are convinced. People, not only the people on the street, people in the power corridor, people in the corporates. So we need more and more such icons. That's number 2. Number 3, we have celebrated scientists. They are producing high quality data, high quality research output, but they are not literally, being translated into the common man language. That is where the media is important, and especially in this age of digital era, we need to think of finding more. If there are any media persons, they can think of having this kind of cadre in the media, because we need to constantly tell the people that this is the crisis we are facing. We are supposed to deliver our duties. So that's why we need to bring this climate change as a whole debate to the core of the debate of the present day public discourse. And the last one but important one, all this literature I was talking about, the creative literature, the scientific literature, academic output, etc., they are not being actually, most of the time, they are not being heard in the policy documents. The government policy documents, the corporate policy documents, the project reports of big infrastructure projects. Often, many projects are being pushed in Himalayas and Western Ghats. Often I wonder, even 20th century, how can they come up with such a project proposals? Are there any scientific rationale? Are there any people who are, because all the 20th century projects are being pushed in the 21st century. Because a lot of scientific data, evidence is there that this can't be done, this can't be done, this can't be done. So my point is, we need to take the wisdom of all this understanding of climate change science, political science, social science, and so on to the policy corridor, so that our policies, our acts, the implementation of acts, the corporate policies, the infrastructure policies, infrastructure project reports, they also imbibe the viveka of the modern science. Thank you.
Thank you, Keshav. And I think these conversations have, brought up so many important ideas, and each of the panelists have also given their own roadmap to how we can go about making a real difference, as Sumana said earlier, into moving into action as such. Now we open the discussion to the audience. You are most welcome to ask your questions.
I want to add a point to Keshav's speech. Professor Sri Nagesh Hegde ratings, and also Krupakar Senani ratings. And why don't we consider Prabhakara Senani ratings and Shivananda Kadave also? So many people in Kannada. So why don't we consider? Nagesh Hegde, sir, has what do you call so many data from government records. He has and he described. That is, it has the point to add.
Certain, they are fabulous writers. Nagesh Hegde has done enormous service to not only Karnataka, in fact to the entire literature of Prabhakar Senani, Sanjay Gopi is coming here.
Yes, Sanjay Gopi.
Yeah, they are all good people.
So many people are writing, and also environment movements in Karnataka. It is also.
I totally agree.
Yes.
I totally
Thank
agree.
you. Thank you.
Yeah, I totally. Those literature should be. It only. Not only the environmental science literature, even the agriculture related aspect, they also should be brought to the larger public domain.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. H.S.M. Jatash. I don't know how many of you have heard of my name. Quite often I am on TV for such debates, and I am not come to the print media for articles and things like that.
tremendous job in Karnataka through a series called Parisara, sir.
No, I think you have mistaken. That is Dr. V.S. Prakash.
Yeah.
I am Dr. H.S.M. Prakash.
Yeah. Okay, geologist, sir.
Yes, yes. You are right. Now, I will take a few minutes more than what is expected of me. The debate is very interesting. I compliment the planners for choosing this theme, literature in the times of climate crisis. In fact, I have read Lord Byron's poem. How many of you have read, or else you can visit tonight when you go back. There's a poem called Darkness. It's an 80-liner, and he has documented, he has frozen the climate crisis that was prevailing in 1816 in Geneva. Okay, and then all of you have heard of or read Frankenstein. Mary Lamb has documented the crisis at that time. It was a worldwide crisis, global crisis, unheard of before that and later to that, even today. Well, there are many books written on literature, this climate change, on Uj earthquake, and then tsunami, Sumatra tsunami, and so many books are available. And your attempts to take it to children is appreciable. You mentioned one thing, that not many scientists are coming forward to document it or to highlight it in public life. In IPCC panel, I have read all the 4 reports and the final one. Okay? And then the recent document given by the Ministry of Energy to the Government of the United States on 23rd July 2025 about the role of CO2 in climate change. Well, I am a hardcore field geologist, served in Geological Survey of India for 35 years, all over India, and then retired. Okay, in 2015, I am a mineral exploration man, all said and done, working on major gold deposits, diamond deposits, copper zinc, rare earth elements. My own discovery in Lingsur area, recent times. So from that experience, I had to shift to climate change in 2018. When the Kodagu and Kerala deluge happened, that touched my heart. There must be some cause for it. Definitely not the CO2, what we have been talking about. I got very deep into the literature and all sources of information to find out the cause, real cause for that climate change. Climate is a subject matter of geology. Geology is called earth science all over the world now. Earth has got 4 spheres: lithosphere, hydrosphere, atmosphere, and biosphere. All are our concerns. But most of our people restricted themselves to lithosphere, few to the hydrosphere, none to atmosphere. Okay, I am in the air for the first time. I will elaborate later. So that time, 18 and early 19, I went through the literature. Paleoclimate is our subject. Whatever is available in our library, historical geology, over the 450 crores of years, every year upon year, lower Archean to middle Archean to late Archean, Proterozoic. No, that's why I told you. More than question, I am elaborating something interesting for the first time to the public. Can you bear with me? Yeah. I don't know. Just few minutes. Okay. So by February 19, I observed certain things globally happening in Hawaii or in Arabian Sea or in Bay of Bengal, Java, Sumatra, things like that. Major happenings, terrific things happening, not happening now and later. Okay, so I started linking the deluge and the happenings, and I found that there's a link between the two. And I went through the literature, and in the past, over lakh years, crores of years, the link was working all through. We talk about climate change in the last 1,000 years or 2,000 years, or rather 100 or 200 years. Okay, this is recent, but in the past, several times, catastrophes have happened. Man was not there, pre-Pleistocene, but crises were there. Mass extinctions were there 5 times. What was the reason for that? It is natural. That natural reason is hyper volcanic activity, especially submarine activity. I admit before the public that none of us concentrated on submarine abduction zone happenings underwater. We are concentrated about what is happening on the land, but something greater is happening underwater. That is responsible for all the changes that we are seeing today. It's a fact. There is the truth and there is the ultimate truth. I am telling you before all of you. Because to tell in public, one has to have conviction. I got it through my studies. Okay? So this is the situation, and later to that, I am following the events every day, every night. I am recording my data, I am having diary entries. So for all such changes, all cyclones, floods, landslides, there is a geological reason for that. Okay? It takes time to elaborate all these things. I can, through PowerPoint, I can talk for 2-3 hours. Okay, that's a different thing. Now, as you said, Nagesh Shetty, when I spoke something innovative in 2020, Nagesh Shetty and his friends, 4 my colleagues, they joined together and they wrote a derogatory against me in Matrimony paper. I took them to the court, information case, and they have paid the penalty, and they have even given apology letter. And this is new science. This is new science. Please, I can give my number 9535416639. Okay.
Prakash sir, thank you.
Please visit Tambora.
Sorry
1815 what happened? All of you can see.
Prakash sir, sorry to interrupt you. We'll have to move on to the next
Sure.
session. I would like to thank all the panelists for their wonderful presentations, and I also thank all the audience who are present here for the first session. Thank you so very much. We will move on to the next session immediately.
Before we move on, I kindly request the panelists to be on stage and receive a token of love and appreciation from our side. That was a very insightful conversation that we had. I kindly request all the panelists to be on stage.